My spouse, age 41, and I, age 46, were married for 18 years until our sex life started to lose its spark. Our twins had grown up and were attending college, and I had hoped that once they moved out, our sex life would improve. However, although there was a brief uptick in activity, having sex in the same places around the house at the same times became monotonous. We found some advice online that suggested taking a vacation with friends without one spouse could help reignite passion and desire. Additionally, flirting with each other could also help create a longing for intimacy. Initially, I was doubtful about the idea of taking separate vacations, but I noticed how enthusiastic my wife was about it, which was rare in recent times. We started planning our individual trips accordingly. My wife and her friends chose Colorado as their destination, which included a visit to the town where she grew up. As far as I knew, her childhood memories there weren't particularly positive, so I was taken aback by her decision to go there without me. On the other hand, I opted to travel with my friends to Wyoming, since I had always wanted to explore Yellowstone National Park. Once we had purchased our tickets, I noticed that my wife began to spend a lot of time texting on her phone. Assuming that she was just coordinating with her friends and discussing their upcoming trip, I didn't want to disturb her. I texted my own friends in the meantime, but we didn't have much to talk about. At one point, I asked my wife for a copy of their itinerary, but her response was unexpected. She seemed caught off guard and mentioned that she needed to make some edits because the first draft had some date mix-ups. Eventually, she handed me a printed copy of the updated itinerary. The itinerary for my wife's vacation with her friends included a series of activities that I perceived as feminine, such as yoga, shopping, hiking, indulging in yogurt treats, and dining at restaurants. However, after 3 days of her 6-day vacation had passed, I found myself missing her a lot. Although I was enjoying myself, the thought of being away from her for 6 days suddenly felt too long. Additionally, my wife had stopped responding to my messages, which made me quite worried. I shared my concerns with my friends, who advised me to relax and make the most of my time in a new place. Despite trying to heed their advice, my wife's responses to my texts continued to be odd and unusual. My wife's responses to my messages seemed indifferent, as though she didn't care about what I had to say and was only responding out of obligation. This made me feel terrible, and I became increasingly worried. That evening, my wife's itinerary placed her and her friends at a restaurant 6 hours away from where my friends and I were located. Determined to surprise her, I began driving at 1 p.m., hoping to arrive by 7 p.m. When I finally reached the restaurant, I was met by my wife's friends, who appeared shocked to see me there. I asked them about my wife's whereabouts, but their response was devastating. She had left them to meet up with someone else. I felt crushed and collapsed onto a nearby chair, where they proceeded to reveal even more unsettling information to me. According to her friends, my wife had been on her phone until the morning when she left without waking anyone up. She had only sent them a message saying she wouldn't be back until late that day. When I asked her friends if she had mentioned anything else about who she was meeting or where she was going, one of them handed me a small slip of paper. She explained that my wife had given it to her for safety reasons in case she didn't return on time for their flight home. My wife had instructed her friend not to tell anyone, especially not me, about where she was going. The slip of paper contained an address. Since I had shown up unexpectedly and expressed my concern, my wife's friend was persuaded to tell me the truth about the slip of paper. I thanked her for the information and quickly went to my car. The friend, named Jade, caught up to me and asked if she could come along. I agreed, as I needed someone else to help balance out my panic. During the drive, Jade shared information about her family, hobbies, and work, which helped distract me. However, as we arrived at the address written on the slip of paper, my worry resurfaced. It was a house, and although there were no cars in the driveway at 8 p.m., I couldn't shake my unease. Then, just before 9 p.m., a car pulled into the driveway. As the driver's seat emptied, my wife emerged from the passenger side. I stepped out of the vehicle with Jade and Tao and called out, "Hey, honey." My wife jumped, turning towards me with a shocked expression. Her mouth hung agape as she demanded to know why I was there and why I was with Jade. I explained that she was there for emotional support, as I was unsure of what I might find. Turning to the unfamiliar man, I asked him who he was. He boldly declared himself to be my wife's lifelong friend and new lover. Enraged, I punched him in the face. My wife screamed and rushed to his defense. My wife yelled out that the man didn't know we were married. I retorted, asking whose fault that was. She confessed that she deliberately kept it from him. I pressed on, asking if this was all part of her plan from the beginning. She refused to answer and even had the audacity to tell me that I shouldn't have come. She then turned to Jade and accused her of being a snitch. I interjected, explaining that Jade only told me because she shared my concern for my wife's well-being. After all, I had driven 6 hours to find her. This trip was intended to rekindle our intimacy and give my wife an opportunity to miss me while reminiscing about our relationship. Instead, she used this time to meet up with a man from her past. I informed my wife that she was no longer welcome at our home and that our relationship was over. I had trusted her to be loyal and used this time to strengthen our bond, but instead she chose to destroy it. I was in disbelief. As I ranted, her audacious lover began to curse at Jade and me, demanding that we leave. He urged my wife to go inside. She made eye contact with me for a mere 4 seconds before apologizing and following him into the house. In just 4 seconds, my wife had made the decision to abandon our 18-year relationship, leaving me standing in another man's yard. I returned to the car with Jade and headed back to the restaurant. She expressed her regret for what had happened and offered to keep me company when I got home, to which I graciously accepted. Once she returned to her car, I embarked on the long drive home. I called my twin sons and close male friends to inform them of what had happened. They offered their unwavering sympathy and support during my time of need. In the following weeks, Jade visited me at least twice a week, offering her company and comfort during this difficult period. I was deeply grateful for Jade's unwavering support, just as much as I appreciated the continual check-ins from my sons and friends, whether over the phone or in person. My sons made it clear that they could never see their mother in the same light again. Though they maintained contact with her over the phone, they focused on their studies and didn't feel obligated to change their lives to help her in any way. One of my wife's mutual friends revealed to Jade that her latest partner had broken up with her after just 4 months, citing her clinginess as the reason. It must have been a painful experience for her, given that she had been married for 18 years. It's understandable that she would become clingy to him. It's possible that she sought emotional reassurance that she had made the right decision, which unfortunately only drove him away. I couldn't help but wonder what her future held, although I didn't put much effort into finding out. It wasn't until a year later when I decided to check my old email address and discovered that my wife had been sending me emails during that entire time. The content of her messages varied from being extremely angry with me to displaying complete desperation for my response and love. To be honest, I felt a sense of relief that I didn't come across those emails until a year later, as by then I had already started a romantic relationship with Jade and wasn't tempted to reconcile with my wife after her betrayal. I hope my story serves as a reminder to people not to cheat, and for those who have experienced betrayal to know that it's okay to feel hurt, but it's not the end of the world. Life goes on, and there is hope for a brighter future. Despite the upheaval in my wife's life, she was presented with an opportunity to transform herself into a better person. It's truly remarkable, and I'm deeply moved by her resilience. I empathize with you, OP, and I'm sorry that you had to endure the painful experience of being betrayed by your partner of many years. You stepped out of your comfort zone in an effort to improve your marriage, but unfortunately your wife made a selfish choice by meeting another man. I'm sorry that she didn't recognize the value and importance of reigniting the spark in your long-standing and successful marriage. The woman made a heartbreaking decision to abandon the man she had spent 18 years with and who was the father of her children, all for a fleeting romance that lasted just 4 months. It's a cautionary tale for everyone. Please do not make the same mistake. Perhaps she shared with AP her story of feeling unfulfilled in her sex life and mentioned that she would be in town for a few days. To AP, it might have seemed like an opportunity to have sex without any commitment. We can only speculate on what promises he made, but it appears that as soon as she left her long-term partner for him, he proved to be incapable of providing her with the stability she had grown accustomed to. The key takeaway from this situation is to avoid engaging in sexual activity with anyone who is not your long-term partner. Sex is meant to be a special expression of love and commitment, but when it occurs with the wrong person or at the wrong time, it can lead to trouble. Instead of seeking external sources of excitement, The best way to add some spark to your relationship with your long-term partner is through communication. Try exploring new ways to express your desires and fantasies in a sexy and unexpected way. Pay attention to what your partner enjoys and become selflessly dedicated to fulfilling their needs. By doing so, you may surprise yourselves and rekindle the passion in your relationship. If you're unsure of what to say, consider asking for clarification or let them know that you'd like to explore some new topics during your pillow talk. Thank you for sharing your story. Now, let me dive into the second story of the day. It revolves around a life-changing event that I experienced. It all began when I received a phone call during my workday. At the time, my wife was 27 years old and we had been married for 6 years. She had been searching for a job for a year, but had only been able to earn a small income through her Etsy store where she sold her handmade crafts. I never wanted to pressure or coerce my wife into taking a job she despised. She had already endured a difficult childhood and my main priority was to encourage and provide her with a sense of security. Our relationship felt great to me, although she would sometimes become depressed, likely due to the painful memories of her past. I made an effort to check in with her daily and ask what was weighing on her mind. However, more often than not, she would remain silent. And on this specific day, while I was at work, I received a call from the police. The call was from the police department of the neighboring county, and I was perplexed when I received it. The officer informed me that they had no other option but to detain my wife that day. Naturally, I was in a state of panic and demanded to know what had happened. According to the officer, they had received multiple reports about a woman who had set a car on fire in a residential area. Initially, I couldn't believe that my wife would be capable of such an act, but the officer confirmed her identity and informed me that they had her vehicle in their possession. I was utterly shocked and bewildered by the news. I inquired whether my wife had provided any statement, offered a reason for her presence at the scene, or provided an explanation for her actions. However, the officer informed me that she had refused to cooperate and remained uncommunicative. I then asked if she was permitted to call me, but instead, the officer requested that I visit in person to talk to her. I agreed, and upon arriving, I was escorted to the interview room where my wife was waiting. When she saw me, her hardened and angry expressions softened, and she appeared defeated. She covered her face with her hands, and I asked her to explain what had happened. I needed answers because I couldn't comprehend the situation. She whispered that she couldn't tell me. When she told me that she couldn't disclose the reason due to being recorded, I asked her why. She claimed that I wouldn't want to know the truth. I protested and assured her that I wanted to know everything. Moreover, it seemed that she had been caught red-handed, so an explanation was necessary. As she sat up, her face appeared red and distressed. She disclosed that she had set fire to her ex-partner's car in response to his infidelity. After digesting this information, I asked her when this had occurred and why she was seeking revenge now. Although she appeared hesitant to provide further information, as her husband and given the circumstances, she had limited options. After taking deep breaths and shedding tears, she revealed that her ex-partner had cheated on her the previous night. I was taken aback and asked for clarification. She then explained that she had been seeing him for a few months while I was at work. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. I was certain that the police would enjoy witnessing this drama unfold. I asked her to confirm that she had been seeing someone else, behind my back, and when she discovered that he had cheated on her, she decided to set his car on fire in broad daylight. Upon hearing this, she appeared shattered. I expressed my disappointment and shame in being her husband. My wife's lack of self-control and responsibility led her to reveal her own affair. I made it clear to her that our relationship was over and left the police station, where I received sympathetic glances from some of the officers. My wife was in a state of panic and could only make calls with permission from the police. The next person she called was her grandmother, who raised her. However, her grandmother initially thought it was a scam call and did not look into it any further for 3 weeks. Eventually, she was contacted and paid my wife's bail by taking out a loan. This was just the beginning of my wife's consequences. After her release from jail, she repeatedly tried to contact me. I received 15 calls from her in one day and eventually answered. She pleaded with me to hear her out and meet her for coffee, saying that our 6-year relationship deserved another chance after the ordeal she had been through. I couldn't bring myself to laugh. Instead, I told her that our relationship was over and that it had been dead for some time. I had only stayed in the relationship out of good faith that she would remain faithful to me and not betray my trust by sleeping with another man. Not only did she betray me by going behind my back, but she also resorted to criminal activity by setting his car on fire. She cried and sobbed into the phone as if it was her lifeline. I reminded her that it was her decision to deceive me and that the truth always has a way of coming out. I was fortunate that her foolish actions exposed her wrongdoing. I wished her luck in her future endeavors, but she begged me not to hang up. Despite her pleas, I ended the call. 4 months later, her aunt contacted me. She contacted me and requested permission to retrieve my ex's belongings using a truck. I agreed, and she informed me that my ex's grandmother had passed away and her house was in foreclosure. As a result, my ex was moving in with her, and I would finally be rid of her subpar belongings from my house. Although I wondered how my ex was coping with the situation, I refrained from asking as I had started seeing someone new and didn't want to give any false hope. I hope my experience serves as a lesson to everyone not to betray their partner by cheating. 2 things helped me cope with this challenging situation the most. The first was making a daily exercise routine a priority. Although I didn't feel like doing it initially, I pushed myself to exercise until I could feel the burn. This helped me release built-up anger, feel more energetic, and improve my outlook. Instead of feeling down, I felt positive and capable. The second thing I did was prioritize self-care by doing things I enjoyed. Most of the time, I listened to music and danced to uplift my mood. At other times, I engaged in activities such as reading, watching TV, drawing, playing music, or going for a walk to take care of myself. I am deeply sorry to hear about your experience, OP. It must have been incredibly shocking to discover that your wife had been unfaithful for months and was arrested for setting a car on fire. It's a painful reminder that sometimes spouses cannot control or anticipate their partner's actions. Despite feeling like you know someone well, they may be struggling with hidden pain and emotions that can manifest in unpredictable ways. If something like this happens to you, please do not blame yourself. You cannot possibly control or anticipate someone else's thoughts or actions. More importantly, their disregard for you and the consequences of their actions does not determine your self-worth. It simply means that they were dealing with unresolved pain and emotions that they did not know how to handle, leading to poor decision-making. As humans, we are all a combination of different faculties working together, and allowing something that is ultimately insignificant to influence how we treat others is a mistake that can have a significant impact. I wish you all the best in life. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. I, 37 male, recently found out that my wife, 35 female, had an affair with our daughter's best friend's father, let's call him Doug. To begin, my wife and I had been together for 10 years. I thought we had made a good life together. We had a daughter, we had recently bought our first house, and we were planning on buying another. She and I met at a live show at a dive bar in the city, and we ended up spending the rest of the night together. We actually didn't even exchange numbers at the time. We parted ways, and didn't really expect to fall back into each other's lives. Then one day, I was at a small Mediterranean restaurant, and I saw her there. Both of us saw it as a sign. Something was telling us that we were supposed to be together. Ever since we've been inseparable. We bought our house 2 years ago, and moved from the city into the suburbs. Our daughter is 6 years old, so we wanted to make sure she was going to a good school, had a nice yard to play in, and had a good environment to grow up in. She is a stay-at-home mom, but sometimes she takes odd event planning jobs. Her experience in event planning has helped her climb to the top of the PTA committees. She took a lot of pride in the work she did to fundraise for the children. It meant a lot to her. It never would have crossed my mind in a million years that she would have found the opportunity to cheat on me at a PTA meeting, but apparently she did. That's actually how my daughter met her best friend. They weren't in the same class, but my wife and Doug decided that it would be nice for both of the kids to have a playdate. They came over to our house, because we have a large in-ground pool and the kids wanted to swim in it. When I heard about the playdate, I automatically assumed that it was probably just another mom from the PTA. I was kind of shocked to see Doug there. Now, I know it sounds like I'm some kind of crazy possessive husband, but that isn't the case. It was more of just the surprise of it being a man over a woman. While my wife was in the kitchen, I stopped her and asked her a little more about Doug. I told her that I was surprised to see that it was a man she had been talking about and not another mom, and she just laughed it off and told me that it didn't seem like relevant information to disclose their gender. I thought it was kind of weird for her to try to rationalize not telling me that way, but I trusted her, so I didn't think much more about it. In fact, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and walked out to the pool to get to know Doug a little better. As it turned out, he was working in the same field as I was, and his wife happened to be overseas for a few months on business. He said that he was just happy to have some additional company for his daughter, so he jumped at the opportunity to schedule a playdate. He wasn't even normally involved in the PTA, he was just picking up some of the slack from his wife while she was away. He seemed like a decent enough guy, and knowing that he was married eased some of the concerns I had about him spending time with my wife. Maybe it was just because I was naive or too trusting, but I thought that if I was married and wouldn't give the time of day to another woman, he would probably be the same way. A few weeks had passed, our daughter had really hit it off with Doug's daughter, and they were always wanting to hang out together. Sometimes that would be at our house, sometimes at Doug's, and sometimes they would go to local parks and things like that. During that time, I noticed that I wasn't seeing my wife as much. She was always either busy with some kind of PTA commitment or taking our daughter to hang out with her new best friend. It was a hard thing to complain about because our daughter was so happy to have a friend. However, during the times that they were both home, my wife was distant. She avoided being in the same room as me. She would either go to bed an hour before me or she wouldn't show up until she thought I was asleep. Because of that, one night I pretended to go to sleep and I waited for her to show up. When she finally did, I surprised her with all of my concerns. I didn't even bring up anything in an accusatory way. I was simply asking her if there was something wrong in our marriage so we could find a way to fix it. When I brought up completely nonchalantly that it seemed like she spent more time with Doug than she did with me, she deflected and told me that she would spend less time with them. But she told me that I had to tell her daughter why she wasn't able to see her friend anymore. Then she went on a rant about how much it would hurt her. I was very annoyed with how she was trying to make me seem like a bad guy just for wanting to spend time with my family, so I just left. I went into my office to get some work done, but as I was there I replayed the conversation in my head, and in hindsight there was something very off about it. You would think that just asking someone to spend time with their family wouldn't result in a huge argument, but when I mentioned Doug she just got defensive. I let my curiosity get the better of me and I logged into her email. We have an open password policy, so she knew all of my passwords and I knew all of hers. Because of that we also know our account usernames and information like that. Her email was pretty much clean. The only thing I noticed was a security alert for another email account. You know, like the ones that you get when you have a backup email associated with another account. This told me that she had another email account I knew nothing about. At first I thought it might have been a PTA email, but when I looked through the other messages it seemed like she was doing her PTA business through her personal account. I couldn't think of a reason she would have another email account. Fortunately for me, because she had her main email as her backup, I was able to change the password on the new one and log in. Right away I knew I was right to check. There weren't many emails, but there was a chain between her and Doug where they were having very explicit conversations with each other. Pictures were exchanged, dates were set, and some serious promises were being made. On top of that there were a lot of order confirmations for things like lingerie and sex toys, none of which had seen it all. From the looks of it they were both planning on leaving their partners and being together. Doug didn't want to risk his assets, so he had to be strategic about leaving, and my wife never said anything about it, but I was certain she would have wanted to come out on top in the divorce. I printed everything as soon as I saw it. If she wanted a divorce she would get one, but it would not pan out the way she thought. I would make sure of that. I slept in my office that night because I just couldn't stand to be by her, but in the morning I called out of work and met with a divorce attorney to get the process started. It took a couple of weeks to get the papers ready, so in the meantime I pretended like everything was hunky-dory back home, but when the papers were ready I knew exactly how I wanted to serve them to her. She left for her usual weekly PTA meeting and I stayed behind with our daughter. What she didn't know was that I hired a sitter to watch her and I followed her there. After a few minutes I walked in while the meeting was already taking place. She was shocked to see me there. The president of the PTA welcomed me and asked me to introduce myself to the rest of the group. I stood up, told them all that I was my wife's husband, then corrected myself to soon-to-be ex-husband. She was clearly confused about that, but everybody else in the room was suddenly very interested in what I had to say. My wife had told me they were all quite gossipy. I looked between her and Doug and handed her the envelope I brought with me containing the divorce papers and all of the evidence I found of her affair. Then I turned to the rest of the PTA and explained what I meant. They were all shocked. One of them even spoke up and asked Doug about his wife. Apparently, a lot of the women in the room had been good friends with his wife. One of them stopped me as I was leaving and asked me more about what I found. She wanted to make sure Doug's wife knew so she could also take the appropriate actions. She ended up giving me her cell phone number so I could call her and explain everything. In the end, my wife and Doug did end up together. Doug's wife divorced him, and because he cheated, she was able to keep the house, the cars, and most of their assets and still received child support and alimony payments from him. I would venture to guess that Doug was paying out more than half of his paychecks to his wife. When my wife realized that both she and Doug would be out of luck since they were caught, she begged me to forgive her and take her back. She kept trying to remind me of all the good times we had, but I didn't listen. I went through with the divorce and she got absolutely nothing from me. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment with Doug while I kept everything else. I ended up selling the house and moving back to my hometown so my mom could help me out with some childcare while I was still working. It actually seems to have been for the best because now my daughter gets to spend time with all of her cousins around her age. She has more friends here than she did in our old town. I do still keep in touch with Doug's ex-wife because our daughters are still friends. OP, I'm so sorry you had to go through with that. You had your gut feeling that something was wrong, and several times she tried to lie to you and convince you that you were in the wrong. I think the most upsetting part of this was her telling you to explain to your daughter why she couldn't see her friend. That was manipulative and a major red flag on her part. I'm glad you were able to get the evidence to ensure neither you nor Doug's wife were taken advantage of in the divorce. It's a shame that it had to end the way it did, but it's good that you're both out of those relationships. I wish you both nothing but the best in the future. Now let's move on to our next story. My wife, 30 female, and I had been together for 10 years ever since our college days. We were one of those couples who finished each other's sentences and made others gag with envy. We both graduated and got right out into the job field and were kind of crushed by reality. Neither of us ended up being able to work in our dream fields, and we were constantly trying to find ways to be happy outside of work. After the pandemic, things only got harder for us, but thankfully we made it through a dark time and we came out stronger in the end. I landed a good job at a new tech startup and things started to change for us. Now here's the thing, my wife had always been secretly dreaming of becoming an actress, so I surprised her with acting classes, thinking it would be a cool way for her to dip her toes in the world of acting. Little did I know that this seemingly harmless decision would unleash a whirlwind of drama in her lives. At first everything seemed pretty normal. She was all in attending those classes, staying up late to rehearse scenes and fully embracing her newfound passion. I was genuinely excited for her, watching her realize one of her dreams. After a few months of classes, things took a turn. The classes usually started in the evening. I'd gotten used to her coming home around 10 or 11, but as time went on she was coming back later and later. She started to distance herself from me emotionally and physically. I noticed she was tilting her phone away from me when she'd look at it, and she'd walk out of the room to take phone calls. All of those are telltale signs of cheating. If something was going on, I wanted to know. I worked up the courage one day to finally sit down and ask her what was going on. I explained all of my concerns and told her that if there was something going on she should tell me so we could find a way to work through it, but she just denied everything. She told me that she was just exhausted from working and taking the classes and that I had nothing to worry about. For a few days after the conversation, I think she took it to heart and she started to act like her old self, but that quickly went away and the same issues we had resurfaced. I just had this nagging feeling that would not leave me alone and that something was wrong. I couldn't ignore the signs she was displaying, so I thought that if she wasn't going to tell me, I would have to find out. I ended up hiring a private detective to follow her to one of her acting classes to see if they found anything. He kept me updated throughout the night while he was watching her, and for a while it seemed fine. He sent me a message telling me the acting class was over, but my wife was walking across the street to a bar with a man from the class. He kept an eye on them while they were there. Then, after about 45 minutes, he told me they were leaving. They were holding hands and cuddling while they were walking down the street. He followed them to a townhouse and they both went inside. He waited for a while, but the blinds were closed so he couldn't really see anything that was going on inside. That was all the evidence I needed to try to do some digging on my own. I didn't want to invade her privacy, but now I pretty much knew that she was cheating on me, so I gave myself the go-ahead. I logged into her Facebook account. That was where she had her acting group chat and where she did a majority of her messaging. I looked through all the members of her acting class chats and searched through them all to try to find the man she was with. I found him pretty quickly, and when I looked through their messages it confirmed all of my suspicions. They had been exchanging very flirty explicit messages and they had been planning dates together. From the context of the messages, they had slept together many times. I dismissed the PI and made a plan to end the marriage. It wasn't something that I wanted to do. I was heartbroken and completely distraught by the news. I even gave her an out for it. She had plenty of opportunities to tell me the truth and not lie about it. The more I thought about how badly she hurt me, the more I wanted to get even with her. It all started because of the acting class, so I wanted it all to end there too. I remembered she told me when she first joined the class the instructor had her perform a monologue on her first day, so I prepared one. I signed up for the class, shelling out the money for a trial of it, and practiced what I was going to say. I made sure to arrive later than everyone else and sit in the very back of the auditorium while everybody else mingled ahead of me. After a while the instructor stood on the stage and called me up. Everybody turned to look at me, but I kept my eyes trained on my wife as I walked to the stage. The absolute confusion on her face was priceless. I introduced myself and waved at my wife while the spotlight was shining on me. Then I read my monologue. It wasn't exactly a monologue per se. It was just me reading some highlight quotes from the messages I found between her and the other guy. She stood up and tried to get me to walk off the stage, but I ignored her. I ended the scene by telling her that we would be getting a divorce and that I was no longer paying for her classes. As it turns out, the guy she was cheating on me with happened to be sleeping around with a couple of other girls in the class. There was a complete uproar when I explained what was going on. Everyone was yelling at him and calling him names. I walked out to let that play out on its own, but my wife chased after me. Even with all the evidence that I had just read to her, she tried to tell me that they were rehearsing for a play. She tried to tell me that the text messages were just acting. I was flabbergasted by her poor attempts at lying. Really, I thought the money I'd spent on those classes might have paid off a little bit more. I told her she had a week to get her things out of her house and that she would be getting official papers from me soon. I stayed with a friend while she was moving out, but I did find out through the grapevine that the man she was cheating on me with was kicked out of the class because of all the chaos he caused. We're currently going through our divorce proceedings. It's definitely all panning out in my favor though. The best part about this is that she can't afford acting classes on her own, so she's no longer able to pursue that dream. OP, I'm sorry you had to go through all of that. She continued to lie to you about your concerns and made you feel invalidated about them. You were right to be suspicious and you did the right thing by hiring a PI. The scene you performed in front of the class was a great idea to get back at her. It's not surprising that the man she was cheating on you with was also with other women in the class. I can't help but wonder if they tried to pursue anything after or if she viewed it as him cheating on her too. It seems like karma for her to have been surprised by the news. I wish you the best of luck in the divorce and I hope you're able to move on from her quickly. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. My wife and I were high school sweethearts. We were married shortly after she graduated from the police academy. I became an electrician. Our marriage was wonderful at first. I loved my wife's ability to operate as a respectable cop and honorable wife at home. She never let her ego go to her head, and she still allowed me to be the leader in our relationship. Over the next 10 years of marriage, we had one son. By this time, my wife was very comfortable in her role as a cop. She joined social media, updating her followers on a daily basis about her assignments and days spent monitoring civilians. When she was younger, she never wore makeup and hardly took the time to do her hair. One morning, I noticed the change in her routine. After eating breakfast and drinking coffee with me, she'd spend an hour and a half getting ready, which included her hair and makeup. I heard her phone pinging several times. We'd been married for more than a decade at this point, so I didn't feel right asking her for her phone. Instead, right before she walked out the door, I asked her who was messaging her while she got ready. She was really surprised I even asked. She said it was her sister. That was odd because her sister hadn't spoken to her in years, due to some petty disagreement she couldn't let go. So I expressed my surprise and asked if they had made up now. She reluctantly told me they had, and everything was all good. Well, that was hard to believe, but I didn't see why my wife would lie to me. Still, I considered finding her sister on social media to ask her if this was the case. I got busy at work when I got a phone call from the local police department. This was bad. I instantly believed my wife had been injured on the line of duty. I answered it, my heart already racing. They told me my wife had been arrested. This was really bad, just not in the way I thought at first. I went to the police station, where I was told the story and showed video surveillance. They played the video first, because it was easier than trying to tell me what they saw. My wife pulled her cruiser into the parking lot of our son's elementary school. She got out and watched the children play from a distance. They were probably too far away for her to spot our son in particular. Then, a second car pulls up. A man gets out, and my wife rushes into his arms. It's as if they are meeting for the first time, or the first time in a while. They almost immediately start making out, and I can't believe what I'm seeing. They don't care that they're in public, let alone the parking lot of a school, with children playing a short distance away. AP is grabbing her butt before they stop, and she drags him by the hand into the back seat of her cruiser, leaving one door wide open, probably so they wouldn't be trapped in the back seat. Once the car got rocking, the back door shut. They were locked in the back seat of the cruiser. Fast forward just over an hour later, when additional police show up and open the back door for them to get out. I couldn't be sure, but this had to be the worst moment in my wife's entire life. This was the worst moment of my life. Finding out that she had cheated on me so shamelessly at an elementary school while acting as an officer of the law. All of my respect and adoration for my wife dissipated. I felt alone, lost, and foolish. I wanted to hold my son, which made me wonder how long my wife would be in jail. The officers didn't know. All they knew so far was that she was being charged with public lewdness, indecent exposure, and disorderly conduct. Her life would never be the same. I got to see her hours later, and I didn't have to say a word. She broke down, telling me how sorry she was. She said she'd started messaging AP online, and today was the day they decided to meet in person. She said she never thought it was going to escalate the way it did, but I told her to shut up and stop making excuses. She started an affair that she decided to consummate seconds after meeting the man. This was not the behavior of a respectable, knowledgeable police officer, wife, and mother. This was the behavior of a sleazy girl that didn't know any better. I told her how disappointed I was that our marriage was over, and that's when I started crying. All the time and feelings I had for her were wasted. The marriage I wanted to last a lifetime was over, suddenly. I would become a single father. When I left the room, my wife was only a shell of the woman she was. I filed for divorce while she served time in prison. I gained full custody of our son. After my ex was released from prison, she started visitation with him. I could tell that after doing time, she was only thankful. She was so relieved to be free and able to see her son. She deeply apologized to me again for cheating, but I told her it was in the past now. I also found a woman worthy of a serious relationship. Believe me, I was skeptical, but her actions and the way she lived her life showed me that she wasn't the kind to underestimate the purity and sanctity of marriage. Her husband had passed away unexpectedly, which was why she was single. She hadn't slept with anyone after him. We waited until our wedding night to love each other in that way. My ex, on the other hand, was too thirsty for this traditional behavior. 4 months after being released from prison, she became pregnant. I was shocked, because she used to be so responsible and on birth control. Of course this man didn't want to be a father and hardly knew her, but they are still trying to co-parent while my ex continued dating. She claims to be searching for a husband, but she continues advertising herself online and sleeping with men she likes. It's no wonder why they don't see her as wife material. Here's a humorous update that just reassures me I was right to handle things the way I did. My ex then tried to seduce me one of the times I was picking up her son, even though I was married. OP, your wife had her dream life, a loving husband, a respectable career, and a child. It's hard to believe she went so far as to start talking to another man behind your back while playing house and pretending everything was fine. Then she actually thought it was a good idea to meet AP at a school while she was on duty. As if that isn't bad enough, she decides to make out with him and have sex in public in the back seat of a car that can and did lock them inside. How embarrassing and shameful. And I'll still bet that women on social media would flock to support her and say she was within her rights to do what she did. People are loony, willing to defend anything. It seems like this was the start of the downfall in her life, because decisions she made after her release weren't any better. Anyways, thank you for sharing this with us. Now let's move on to our next story for today. Then how much I would fall for her. She was so kind, sweet, and shy. She didn't have social media apps, and she was extremely book smart. She was pretty plump, but she looked really good. I wasn't in it for looks, though. I knew better than to fall for any basic woman. At dinner, we really hit it off. We had a lot in common, and she seemed down to earth. I asked her out on a second date, and the rest is history. Eventually she started hanging out with me in my dorm, and it was only a matter of time before she met my roommate. She was only shy around him, staying close to me whenever he was there. We would occasionally go out with a group of friends to have some fun, and the longer we spent together, the more she opened up to the friends we socialized with. She started to find her circle and connect with other women. That's when she joined a social app and added virtual friends. Around the same time, she started working out. At this point, we'd been in a serious relationship for 3 years, and we graduated. We got married around the same time my wife reached her goal weight. Her confidence and number of friends had tripled since the day she met me. I loved her with all my heart, and I was ready to be with her and only her for the rest of my life. She said she felt the same. After work one day, I made plans to meet my brother at a bar. I was under the impression that my wife was at home. As soon as I walked in the place, I spotted my wife. She was sitting at a table with my roommate from college. I hadn't spoken to him since before we graduated. I didn't even look for my brother, I just walked straight over to them. When my wife looked at me, her expression turned to humiliation. But within a moment, it changed to calm and defensive, like she already had a plan to explain all this away. I was right, because as soon as I asked what the heck was going on, she said they were just 2 friends out for a drink to catch up. My roommate could hardly look at me. He was trying to copy her calm expression, but he wasn't very good at it. I asked him to explain this, and he just shrugged and tried to play it off, like she asked him to meet up with her as old friends. I wasn't buying it. I asked how often they messaged each other, and she was quick to tell me that it had been at least a year since they spoke. AP looked guilty and tried to play dumb while he agreed with her. This just didn't feel right. Then my wife tried to say I was jealous and insecure, because she would never do anything to betray the sanctity of our marriage. My brother approached the table and asked if everything was okay. I told him it wasn't, and I'd have to meet up with him another day because I needed to take my wife home. She was beside herself, extremely upset and irritated with me and the whole situation, but she still grabbed her purse and apologized to AP before getting up and leaving with me. At home we had a big fight, because she really believed I was at fault for not wanting her to meet up with AP without telling me. I asked her to give me her phone, and that's when things went bad. She started packing a bag dramatically, like my request was the last straw. Just before it was filled, she broke down crying without a word from me. She asked me why we had to do this, and I told her it was because she wouldn't see things my way. My way being that, hanging out with my old roommate behind my back and refusing to show me her phone was unacceptable. She finished packing, making sure her phone was in her back pocket, before telling me she was going to stay at her aunt's house. I told her if she left, it would most likely be the end of our marriage, because I didn't believe she was really going there. She was just appalled, but still refused to give me her phone, and so she felt like she had no choice but to leave. 20 minutes later, I drove to her aunt's house, and she was not there. Her aunt had no idea what I was talking about or where my wife would be. I sat in the car on my phone and looked up my old roommate. I messaged one of our mutual friends from college and asked if he knew where AP moved to. I explained some of the situation, and that was enough for him to give me his address. My wife's car was parked outside when I got there. I was about to knock on the front door, but I heard noises from the backyard. The house was surrounded by dense woods. It felt like my heart was about to explode when I saw them having sex. There was an in-ground hot tub right beside them, so I ran up at full speed and shoved AP into it. I thought about grabbing my wife and dragging her back to the car, but I had a moment of clarity. She chose to come here and cheat on me, instead of giving me her phone and admitting what had been going on. This was more than enough of a reason never to speak to her again. I decided I'd done enough, and found out what I needed to know. She was absolutely shocked and hysterical. She wasn't really crying tears, but she tried to sound like she was upset or crying. She asked me what the heck I was doing, as if all this was my fault. I could not believe it. Then, as I started walking back to my car, she screamed for me to stop and come talk to her. She actually wanted me to talk to her about how I'd just caught her cheating on me. I spotted her keys laying on a chair and quickly took her house key. I left her there, screaming my name. I filed for divorce and refused to speak a word to her. The best part of this whole story is that she tried to continually sleep over AP's house, but after a few days he kicked her out and said he didn't see their relationship going anywhere. It started while she was married, so it's foolish to believe that that could become anything serious or worthy of trust. Since he didn't want her anymore, she went to her aunt's for real this time. Her aunt was furious with her, reprimanding her like she was a child, in person and on social media. It was only 11 months later that my ex announced she was expecting her first child. She was not in a serious relationship and still isn't. It's been 5 years since our divorce was final and I have remarried. My wife doesn't even have a smartphone because she doesn't want to be sucked into this warped perception of reality that modern women have today. They don't know a good match when they meet one, and they are always willing to trade up as soon as they get bored. My wife knows this and refuses to do that to me. She wants to live a life comparable to her grandmother, and I admire her for that. It's never acceptable for a wife to secretly meet up with another man. Even if she tells him she's going to, I think it would be best for the man to put his foot down and tell her no. What reason does a wife have to hang out or meet up with another man or men? It doesn't matter if it's a group of people, there's no reason why her husband can't be there with her. In marriage, they are one. She should never be talking to another man outside of her marriage unless he's related to her. Friendships, sometimes even between the same sex, often lead to complications in relationships. Either the woman falls for the friend of her husband or her female friend supports her in her delusional thinking. As soon as a woman gets bored in her marriage or starts to convince herself that her husband isn't meeting her expectations, there's always a woman there to tell her she's right, and she doesn't need to compromise or try to salvage the relationship. It's clear that your wife never had the confidence she found in her relationship with you. She took it and used it to start talking to your old buddy from college the moment she got bored. It's very sad that women have no idea how to commit to their man or their decisions nowadays, and are encouraged to let their emotions rule them. The best relationships and decisions are made by choice, not constant gratification. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. I'm a man, so I think I'm not that special. Therefore, I just do the work regardless of how I feel, and to make matters worse, I swallow my emotions. However, I think my case is genuinely special, so I want you guys to listen and let me know what you think. Your help will be highly appreciated. Here's my story. They say that time heals everything. Plus, they say you just need a new woman to move on. I'm now engaged and back home with my fiancé, but my anger toward my ex will just not go away that easily. I'm 39 years old already and was 18 when I met my ex, Marisol. During that time, I was a member of a Latin Kings band. I had been in that gang for 5 years, and always found myself in and out of trouble. Thankfully, Marisol helped me change for the good. She was a church girl, so she was the complete opposite of what I was. We were like night and day. Somehow I thought we would complement each other. You'll understand why I was wrong, but anyway, let me explain to you how I met her. My grandma, a pious and devoted Catholic, dragged me to Sunday Mass, and when I saw Marisol, I fell in love right off the bat. I asked my cousin, who was a friend of hers, if he could introduce me to her, but he refused. He said that he didn't want me to ruin her. He was right, but she got my head in the clouds. Have you ever met someone that you wanted to make yourself better to be with? Wanted to be that man who would walk the right path? That was her. When I found out that she was going to church almost every day, I hung out by the steps, talking to her. I always walked her to and from church. She made me feel like I wasn't worthless. I forgot my love for Jesus Christ, but she was like a faith reminder to me. I felt like the Holy Spirit was invading me. On top of that, I finally gave up on gang life, got my GED, and became a regular churchgoer. One thing led to another, and we ended up dating. I couldn't stop thinking of our promising future together, away from the dangers of the gang lifestyle. However, I got unintentionally pulled back in. I was at a store and ran into someone that I used to have problems with. They were running their mouths, and I tried to ignore it. I swear I did. I just let them talk and I walked away, but then I got stabbed in the shoulder blade and lost my mind. I beat that man. I just couldn't accept this violence, plus I'd probably die if I didn't fight back. Anyway, I got arrested, and suddenly, it was like the things I did to make my life better vanished. Marisol was mad at me. My grandmother kept bringing up my past mistakes, and my cousin was telling me that he knew that I wasn't going to change. Those tribulations were just a God's test, I guess, but it hurt me to hear those words of unappreciation and distrust. My public defender saw me trying to better myself, and by the grace of God Almighty, got me off after a month in lockup. Despite being angry with me, Marisol visited me almost daily. I really appreciated her understanding, and for me, she was the light at the end of the tunnel. I endured that unjust imprisonment just to be with her again. A month after I got out, I found out I was going to be a father, and I didn't want my kid to have a dad that was dead or in jail. God blessed me with a son, and another huge test that would tell if was a man of value or not. Only when you're forced to improve, you improve, and feeding a family and providing for your woman is a huge example of that. I didn't want to be an absent father or get killed. I did not want Marisol to become a single mom. I wanted to do good deeds, not only to seek God's pleasure, but also to thank Marisol for helping me get back to my faith and escape my former lifestyle. I saw the situation as a blessing, but I just didn't know that I would get tested even more after 9 months. I then went to a trade school to become a mechanic, and I hustled for my future family. When Luna was born, it was almost the worst day of my life. Marisol wouldn't stop bleeding. She went into shock, and they had to give her a double hysterectomy. She was in the hospital for months, and Luna became my world. I wanted her life to be the best. I wanted to give her the world. When Marisol was released, I promised her that our daughter will have a life far better than ours, and for years I kept that promise. I saved enough money to move us to the suburbs and became homeowners. I made sure Luna went to private school, knew how to defend herself, and always made sure I was the perfect husband. I didn't know my parents. Plus, I didn't have a positive male role model in my life, so I didn't know what a healthy relationship looked like. Television dads were my male role models, and I mimicked them and the marriage they had on television. As the years went by, I owned my own garage. My cousin became a pastor. My grandmother was still a pain in my neck. My relationship with my wife was stronger than ever, and I made sure I kept my prison body, but Luna hated me. Since she turned 13, she just started hating me. She didn't want me to hug her, rolled her eyes every time I told her I loved her, ignored me when I asked her about her day in school. It hurt me, and Marisol saw it. She told me that she was a teenager and that I should just let it ride. She will come back to me. For 2 years, it was like that. So for her quinceañera, I wanted to go all out, got everything she wanted, and she was still disrespectful. Briefly, the old me almost came out just to put her in her place, but instead, I went to my cousin, vented my frustration and doubts about being a good father, and he told me to just let her be, and he said a prayer for me. I wanted a slideshow for the father-daughter dance. I got a chunk of the pictures of us together, but I realized I didn't have any recent pictures of us. She didn't want to take any. The last time I had pictures of her and me smiling with me was on her 13th birthday, and those were on my daughter's broken tablet. I took that tablet, went to a repair shop, and I didn't care about the cost. I needed that tablet fixed, after a day and $300. The tech fixed it, and I was happy. I knew her passcode, but I never bothered invading her privacy. I just wanted those pictures, and when I opened that tablet and looked in the gallery, there they were, my little girl smiling and happy to be with me. I felt great. Then the instant messages appeared. It was my daughter talking to my wife. It was a long banter that she didn't want me to dance with her, and it did hurt, but as my wife said, she's being a teenager. Then she said something that destroyed me. She asked why she had to do the father-daughter dance with me, since I'm not her father. I felt my heart stop, got dizzy, my mouth dried up, and I needed to sit down. My wife responded that I raised her, I loved her, and that makes me her father. But Luna responded by saying that my cousin is her father, and she can't wait for her to turn 18, so she could tell me the truth, and she could live with her real dad. That she hated me, that she thanked God that I'm not her father. Marisol began cursing her out, saying that it was a mistake for my cousin to tell her the truth 2 years ago, and the more they talked, the angrier I got. My wife lied to me for 15 years. My cousin, whom I confide my issues about Luna, and my fears about being a bad father, not only slept with my wife, but had me raise his child. I wanted to hurt them. I felt a mixture of anger, sorrow, and grief. I wanted to scream, cry, and die at the same time, if that makes any sense. Not only did I believe that my wife was faithful, the very guy who was supporting me during my tough times, my cousin was the kid's. That's a double betrayal. But you know what? Revenge is a dish best served cold. It was about time to give these traitors a taste of their own medicine. I went to a dark place, so I wouldn't do anything stupid. I told Marisol that I needed to focus on work so I could pay for the quinceañera, and instead I drove to Manhattan, and saw my old public defender who wasn't a low-level attorney anymore. He had a nice expensive firm near Midtown East. I was surprised that he remembered me, but apparently I was his first case as a public defender. We sat down, and I told him everything. Gave him the tablet, and when he turned it on, the messages just kept coming. Only this time, Luna was talking to my cousin, her real father, and he was telling her to give me a chance. How I was always there for her, but Luna told him that so was he. How it makes sense that they have so much in common, and even called him Poppy multiple times in their conversation, and he responded and told her that she was his little girl. We went through our options, and he asked me what I wanted to do, and I told him that I wanted to go full scorched earth. I wanted to poison the well, and he asked me several times if that is what I wanted, and nodded. I also told him that everything had to be filed before the quinceañera in 2 weeks. So we sat down and spent the next 12 hours on what needed to be done, and I followed his instructions to the letter. I secretly placed my business for sale. I called the private school and told them that I will not be paying for next year. I closed the college accounts and the savings that I had for Luna, and prepared to place my house for sale online. There was only one thing I deviated from: the day of the quinceañera. That day went off without a hitch. The whole family was there. Luna was smiling and having fun. Marisol kept asking me if I was okay, and I lied to her. It was hard not to hate her. She knowingly let me raise another man's child. She slept with my cousin, a man who saw me as my brother, and the godfather of my child. So the rage was hard to suppress, to say the least. When it was time for the father-daughter dance, I called her to the center of the stage. She looked annoyed, but walked over. I had the music playing, and her smile tore me apart. For years, I wanted to see that smile again, and now I didn't want it. As we danced, I had the slideshow playing. Then there were pictures of the two of us, and towards the end of the song, screenshots of her text messages with her mother and real father. My wife, the cheater, learned the hard way why the Bible criminalizes adultery, and my cousin learned the hard way why you shouldn't put your hands on another man's woman. Both acts have severe consequences. Needless to say, this didn't bode too well. Marisol looked like she saw a ghost. Luna just kept staring at the large screen, and my cousin just stared at me with fear. Marisol ran to me and told me that she could explain, and I told her that I filed for a divorce. She could explain it in court. She grabbed my arm, begging me, and I pulled back. I told Luna that I worked a lot to give her the world, and now she doesn't deserve it. I began to walk out, but not before telling my cousin that every time I see him, I'm going to knock him out. Then I knocked him out. The aftermath was harsh. Marisol and Luna were at my grandmother's apartment. Her family was shocked and disgusted with her. They wanted nothing to do with her. Her father actually apologized to me. I don't know why. He never liked me despite turning my life around. That man hated me, but now I was the perfect husband and father, but just a few days prior, I was the devil incarnate. My grandmother had the audacity to tell me about the story of Abraham, and how when came back from battle 3 years later, his wife had a 1-year-old child, and he raised him as his own, and how I should be like Abraham, so I told her to get out of my house. All those religious people were the biggest sinners on the planet in my eyes. I admit my past sins, especially the years as a gang member, but at least I gave up on that lifestyle and became a good provider and husband. In contrast, these religious individuals were nothing but traitors. She wanted to go to therapy, but I just didn't feel like it. Once a cheater, always a cheater. Plus, she thought I was overreacting. To make matters worse, she acted like she was a telenovela actress, blowing up my phone after she learned that I sold my business and I put her house on sale. To this day, I don't know what hurts the most. Being lied to by a woman who you thought was the love of your life, or having a child whose life you tried to improve and give the world, just toss you aside like trash. Fortunately, I didn't need to pay any child support, and the female judge was absolutely fair. God bless her for her understanding. I'm a man well treated by the judicial system. That's a great accomplishment. Still, I'm not over what she did. OP, you escaped a toxic lifestyle and came back to your faith. That's admirable, and you're a great example of discipline. It's natural that you reacted badly when that gangster stabbed you in the shoulder, and you should not have been put in prison. However, all this proves is that Marisol wasn't the one for you since she cheated on you with your cousin and lied to you for 15 years. Once a cheater, always a cheater. And let's not forget your cousin. He's a traitor too. Now that you're not providing for your ex-wife and your cousin's kid, they're both contacting you and trying to make things up. Keep in mind that you've just made the right decision, and you shouldn't feel any regrets for ignoring those liars. Thank you for sharing this admirable story with us. I wish you all the best going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. I knew something was up when our grocery budget increased enough to feed another person. I, 38, was the working partner, while my wife, 35, was at home with our 2 kids. They were almost old enough for kindergarten, but until then, it made more sense for her to stay home with and give them their preschool education. It worked out well for us, and pretty often we had family game nights, usually hide and seek in the dark, and times when my wife and I sat down to talk like all couples should. One night when I got home, my younger daughter asked if we could play hide and seek in the dark so that I could find the man in the house. I was really confused, but my wife laughed and said that was for Narnia. We decided to play some games that night. I totally forgot about my daughter's comment. About 1 week later, my wife and I sat down to review the budget. She spent way more on groceries, once again, and when I asked her why, she didn't know what to say besides she only got what we needed. I asked if this included toiletries, and she said yes, but the math just didn't add up. I gave her a new budget to stick to, but 1 month later, while we were talking again, she spent even more than the month before. I asked how much our kids eat, and she just laughed at me. I told her I was serious, we needed to survive off all the stuff we had in the pantry and stop spending so much money. Well, I didn't know it was the last time we would ever have a budget meeting again. It was the last time we did a lot of things. I got home from work a little early the next day, and I heard several footsteps upstairs. As I entered our bedroom, my wife shut the door of her closet fast and hard. She turned around and looked really scared. I asked what was going on, and felt my heart rate escalating. She tried telling me nothing, but she wouldn't move away from the closet. I then moved her aside, and I whipped open the door. I turned on the light and was standing practically face to face with AP. I yanked him out and started yelling, asking who the hell he was and what he was doing there. My wife looked really freaked out when I found him. She could see her life ending before her eyes. I thought I recognized the scared man before me, but I couldn't remember how I knew him. Again, I demanded to know why he was in my wife's closet and who he was. He didn't want to say anything, but finally said his name was Josh. My little daughter piped up from the doorway and said he was Mommy's boyfriend. My jaw dropped, and my wife said no, he was just Mommy's friend, but I remembered now. He was my wife's ex from 4 years ago. What was I supposed to do? My daughters were witnessing all this. I grabbed the hair on the top of his head and drug him out of the bathroom, but he said he'd leave willingly. Outside I asked him if he slept with my wife. He looked embarrassed, but said yes. I punched him in the face and he fell to the ground. He said he didn't have anywhere else to go, so she let him come in whenever I was gone and saved him from starving. I told him he could set up camp in an alligator swamp for all I cared, but he was never seeing my wife again. He walked off. After the kids went to sleep that night, I told my wife to leave immediately. She was upset but didn't look like she believed I would kick her out. She got naked and laid on the bed, telling me she just cared about his well-being. But they never had sex, and now that I found out, the grocery budget would go back to normal. She said she realized now that she couldn't care for this man in my house with my money. She held him for a while and said she was glad things were over with. I told her I knew they had sex. She instantly looked concerned but not ready to confess. She asked why I thought that. I said because AP could have lied, but he didn't. He told me the truth because I recognized him as her ex. Her face started turning white at this point. I told her I wasn't an idiot and I could see right through her. I knew she slept with him because she still had feelings for him and let him come into our house whenever I was gone, and kept it all a secret from me. She started to cry, and I knew I had her. She begged me to forgive her and swore she didn't expect any of this to happen. She just wanted to help someone in need. But she really only loved me and wanted to have our family for the rest of her life. I told her she made a very bad decision to keep him here and hidden from me. She put herself in a terrible situation. Her cheating was a likely and easy possibility. It was the hardest thing ever for us to tell the kids that Mommy was moving out. Even though they would still see her plenty, and she was only moving to Grandma's house, it was traumatizing. She lived with us, then she didn't. We didn't give the children the option to move. Because it was better, they primarily stayed with me. They didn't ask to go with their mom. They were just upset with her for letting in a man that wasn't daddy. This was her fault, and there wasn't any other way to look at it. My wife was sick with grief. She saw the kids a lot, and they even slept over at Grandma's house a few times with Mom, but it was hard. She asked me I don't know how many times to forgive her, but I couldn't. I didn't want or trust her anymore, not as my wife or a worthy motherly example. I hope she could prove me wrong in the latter. So far, she has. I started dating, but I don't let my kids know this. It would be a shame to involve them anymore in adult issues. OP, I am so sorry your wife was caring for and harboring her ex in the same house as your young kids. Who knows what they saw and how much they knew about it. It must have been very strange for them, and I hope you and your kids recover from this as peacefully as possible. I don't understand how your wife had the nerve to secretly let this man in the house, feed him, and repeatedly sleep with him. The disrespect and inconsideration for her family astounds me. I am relieved that you didn't try to forgive her or accept her reasoning for why she let him in. You convinced her you knew she was guilty, without a doubt, so she had no choice but to accept her fate. Why should she get a second chance to be a faithful wife and a good example for her kids when she blew it the first time? To make this kind of mistake is to prove that you need to learn a lesson in honesty and care for others. If someone doesn't want to learn these lessons the hard way, they can learn from the mistakes of others and become the person they'd hope to find for themselves. I wish you all the best. Now let's get into our second story for today. One day I was using my wife's cell phone to take a picture of our baby when I saw a message come in on an adult friend app. I have no idea why she didn't turn off notifications, but I hardly ever touched her phone, so maybe that was why. Needless to say, I freaked out on her. We just had our baby 2 months ago, and she was already trying to find someone else. I told her I thought men were supposed to be the ones cheating on their wives after childbirth, and she didn't appreciate that comment. She swore she wasn't sleeping with anyone, but I refused to speak to her for several days. I didn't help with the baby when she needed me to, only when she could have been the one to do it. I refused to watch our child so she could go out and do God knows what. After 4 days, she was begging me for a break for a few hours. She wanted to go out, alone. I told her absolutely not. I said I wasn't stupid, I just found something incriminating on her phone, so why would I agree to let her go anywhere without me? She had no trust from me. So she started keeping me up at night. Even though it was the last few days before I had to return to work, she would wake me up every time the baby woke up. Even if I didn't get up, she just didn't want me to get any sleep. We were not on good terms, but I felt like I had to watch her. I didn't want our relationship to be over. I was building a life with her, and we just had a baby. This was breaking my heart, but I wasn't even sure if anything happened. She came to me a day later and offered an arrangement. She said there was a nice couple she knew from work, before going on maternity leave, and they wanted to come over and hang out. She said if I let them come over, she'd let me sleep and resume all baby duties without complaint. In addition to that, she claimed she never actually cheated on me, so I was worried for nothing. I felt pretty defeated, but also relieved. I gave in. I slept really well that night, and pretty much accepted that I had been worried for nothing. I now know that I was a fool. The next day, I had to work again. My shift was from 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. At 6 p.m., my wife's friends came over. She didn't warn me they were on their way, so I felt caught off guard. I wondered if I was prepared to leave my wife and new baby alone with these people. What if my wife cheated on me with one or both of them? They seemed nice enough. The girl was a little nervous to be there, like she suspected she was meeting her boyfriend's AP. Her boyfriend was happy to be at her house, even though I was there scowling at him. He pretended not to notice and mentioned how bummed out he was that I had to leave so soon after they got there. I didn't like him and he knew it, but he didn't care. It was annoying, but I knew I had to go back to work. If I didn't show up on my first day back, I'd probably be fired. My wife swore she didn't do anything, and this was a romantic couple, so I kissed my wife goodbye and left. Driving to work felt weird, so after an hour of work, I felt like a moron when I pulled my boss aside to tell him what I suspected was going on at home. He told me to take care of whatever I needed to, so I raced home and barged in the front door to find my worst nightmare. All 3 of them were naked in a pile in compromising positions in our living room. Music was playing loudly, the lights were dim, and it reeked of skunk smell. I turned on the lights and got out my phone to take pictures while they yelled and cursed and scrambled to get dressed. This was it, the gratifying and mortifying moment when I caught my wife in the act with 2 people I met face to face. It was partially my fault I was experiencing this because I agreed to let her have them over, and I left them all alone even after finding the notification on her phone. At least now I had the proof I craved to officially divorce her. She was so out of it that night that she put her shirt on backward and didn't follow me upstairs when I got some of my stuff and her baby. When I came back down, she started crying and asked me not to leave or take the baby. I couldn't believe this was happening. I told her I'd just walked in on her cheating on me. At the very least, I needed time at my mom's to think things over. She looked nervous, but like she didn't know how to argue because she knew she was guilty and she wasn't thinking straight. I'm extremely lucky to have my mom. I don't know what I would have done if I didn't have her to go to in my time of need. The next morning, my wife called me 50 times. She was hungover and crying. She begged me to forgive her and blamed the couple for convincing her she deserved the party a little as a new mom. I guess that's persuasive enough to convince someone to cheat, but I know my wife was trying to cheat on me before these people came over. Maybe she met them online or something, but whatever it was didn't matter because I never forgave her. I saw her at the divorce and since then several times for visitation, but when I showed the pictures I had and gave my recount of events, I proved to be the more responsible parent. My wife is ashamed of her actions and regrets what she did every day because she is missing time with her offspring. I hope anyone going through this understands that it's not their fault their spouse cheated. This can happen to anyone, and there are so many people out there in the world. OP, you have been through a traumatic thing. Discovering a spouse's infidelity or adult friend apps is a serious thing, and there should be immediate consequences for those actions. I'm glad you didn't just go on living life as normal, but actually tried to find the truth. You followed your gut even though it might have backfired on you to leave work early and see what they were doing. Taking pictures was very smart even though it must have been difficult in that stressful moment. Your wife was in such a guilty and bad place that she couldn't even stop you from leaving with the baby. It's a shame she let herself into that situation by inviting these people over however she met them. She wasn't considering you or the family you guys were building together. She didn't think about her child's future at all when she went behind your back. Cheaters beware. If you take time to think about the potential consequences and effects it could have on your children or loved ones or yourselves, you'll find it's always better to remain honest even if the answer is divorce. But hopefully through communication and honesty relationship troubles can be resolved to keep the commitment and family intact. Thank you for sharing this story. I wish you all the best going forward in your recovery. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened.